Officer Daniel Hayes thought he'd seen every kind of pain a winter night could bring until he heard the cry. Not human, not the wind. It was the sound of something broken, still fighting to live. He slowed his patrol car along Route 12, headlights stretching across the falling snow. And there, half buried beside the guardrail, lay a German shepherd, her paw caught in a steel trap, blood spreading across the white. She trembled, breath shallow, but eyes still holding on. Daniel knelt beside her, whispering, "Easy, girl." As he freed her leg, his glove brushed her belly. And he felt it. A faint movement. She was pregnant. He wrapped her in his patrol blanket, placed her gently on the back seat, and drove through the quiet night toward the only vet clinic still lit in Frost Hollow. He didn't know it yet, but saving her would uncover a buried crime, a forgotten project, and a miracle that only faith could explain. By dawn, she would have a name, Grace. And through her, Daniel would learn that even in the coldest winter, God still sends warmth to those who stop and care. If you believe in second chances, share this story, or write amen in the comments and pray for every soul still waiting for their own grace tonight. The wind that night howled like something alive, a beast clawing at the edges of the Montana plains. The sign for Route 12 swayed violently, its metal shriek swallowed by the storm. Visibility was near zero. Only the red and blue flash of Officer Daniel Hayes' patrol lights cut through the curtain of snow. He had been on the road for 6 hours, checking rural houses, closing off roads, and hauling stranded drivers to shelter. Frost Hollow was the kind of town where people still knew every mailbox and every dog by name, which made nights like this one personal. The storm had come early, hammering the valley without mercy. Inside the cruiser, the heater rattled weakly. Daniel adjusted his gloves, his breath fogging the windshield. He was in his early 40s, the kind of man shaped by long winters and longer silences. Square jaw, a trace of stubble, dark hair streaked with silver near the temples. The lines around his eyes came from years of squinting into headlights and bad weather, not from laughter. He was about to turn back toward the station when something flickered in the snow, a faint movement, low to the ground. Instinct made him slow the cruiser. At first, it looked like a pile of debris. Then he saw it twitch. Daniel stopped, stepped out into the screaming wind, and instantly felt the cold bite through his jacket. His flashlight beam swept over the snowdrift and froze. There, half buried and barely breathing, lay a German shepherd. Her fur was matted with ice and blood, one hind leg caught in a steel trap. The snow around her was dark and sticky, a crimson halo fading under the falling flakes. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, dropping to his knees. The dog lifted her head weakly. Amber eyes met his, alert, terrified, pleading. He spoke softly over the roar of the wind. "Easy, girl, easy now. I've got you." He pulled a multi-tool from his belt and began working the trap. The metal was frozen solid, his gloves stuck to the steel. The dog whimpered, muscles trembling as he pried the jaws apart. When it finally snapped open, Daniel yanked his coat off and wrapped her in it. He could feel her heart, frantic, then slowing. Her breathing rasped against his wrist. "Stay with me," he whispered, pressing his forehead briefly to hers. Then he lifted her, heavier than she looked, limp with exhaustion, and staggered back to the cruiser through knee-deep snow. The radio crackled as he drove. "Dispatch, this is Hayes. I've got an injured animal, severe bleeding, possible hypothermia, requesting immediate medical assistance at Frost Hollow Clinic." The dispatcher's reply was faint under the static. "Copy that, Hayes. Dr. Carter's on call tonight. Drive safe. That road's closing behind you." He didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the storm. Every bump of the road felt like a heartbeat counting down. By the time he reached the clinic, the town was buried under snow, a single light. glowed behind frosted glass. The sign read, Frost Hollow Veterinary Clinic, letters half hidden by ice. He kicked the door with his shoulder. A woman appeared, startled but steady. She was around 35, auburn hair tied loosely, cheeks pale from the long night. Her eyes, greenish-gray, sharp with focus, locked onto the shape in Daniel's arms. "Bring her here," she said, pulling a metal table into the light. He laid the dog down. Blood streaked his gloves and the floor. The woman's movements were swift and precise. "Name's Emily Carter," she said without looking up. "You with the department?" "Sheriff's office," Daniel replied. "Found her off Route 12. Trap wound. Bad one." Emily cut through the fur around the leg. "That's not a hunter's trap," she said quietly. "Teeth patterns too tight. Military grade." Daniel blinked. "Come again?" She didn't answer right away. "I saw this kind of steel once, years back. Canine equipment." Her tone carried an edge, curiosity mixed with unease. Daniel leaned on the counter, watching her work. The dog's leg was shredded, tendon exposed, yet she didn't cry. She just stared at him, trusting despite the pain. "You ever seen one that calm?" Emily asked. He shook his head. "Only one. My partner's dog, Rex." Something heavy moved behind his eyes, but he said nothing more. Emily cleaned and stitched, the sound of metal instruments clinking in rhythm with the wind outside. Minutes bled into hours. The storm eased. At last Emily exhaled, shoulders relaxing. "She'll make it," she said, "barely, but she will." Daniel nodded. He looked down at the dog, now resting under a wool blanket, her breathing steadier. "Grace," he said quietly. Emily glanced up. "Grace?" "Seems right," he murmured, "for something that shouldn't have lived." She allowed herself a small smile. "Grace it is, then." He stayed even after the procedure ended, sitting beside the examination table, coat still stained with blood. The generator hummed. The smell of antiseptic and coffee mixed in the air. Outside, dawn crept pale over Frost Hollow, turning the snow to dull silver. Emily poured him a mug and handed it over. "You should get some rest, officer." He shook his head. "I'll stay a bit." She studied him, the rigid shoulders, the quiet eyes. "You've done this before," she said softly. He hesitated. "I used to handle K9s in Bozeman, lost one in a raid. Since then, I guess I just can't drive past a dog in trouble." Emily nodded. "You did good tonight." Daniel's gaze stayed on Grace. Beneath the blanket, her chest rose and fell. He placed a hand gently on her side, feeling faint fluttering. Then he frowned. "Doc," he said, "come here a sec." Emily moved closer. He pressed her hand to the dog's abdomen. "Feel that?" There, faint but rhythmic, small, separate. Heartbeats. Emily froze. "She's pregnant." Daniel looked at her, startled. "Can she?" "If she stabilizes, yes," Emily said, voice low. "But she's been bleeding too long. We'll have to watch her carefully." For a moment they both stood in silence. A man, a woman, and a battered creature who somehow carried new life through the storm. Daniel whispered, "She fought to stay alive for them." Emily looked up. "Maybe that's what Grace really is." He didn't answer. He just sat there, listening to the wind fade. The sun rose over Frost Hollow like a reluctant guest, painting the town in pale gold. Daniel stepped outside for air, exhaustion pressing on his bones. The snow around the clinic glittered like crushed glass. He rubbed his temples, ready to head back in, and then noticed something beside the door. Half buried in the snow lay a metal shard, dull silver, stained dark at the edges. He picked it up, turning it over in his gloved hand. A small engraving caught the light. K9 Tac 12. He frowned. The edges were too clean, the cut deliberate, not an accident. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling its weight. Inside, Emily was checking Grace's vitals. She looked up as he entered. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he lied, glancing at the shard again. She didn't press. "You should go home, Daniel. I'll call if anything changes." He nodded, reluctant. Before leaving, he crouched beside Grace one last time. "You hang in there, girl," he murmured. "You're safe now." The dog stirred faintly, her eyes half open, amber light flickering in the dim clinic. As Daniel stepped into the cold morning, snow began to fall again, softer this time, almost gentle. The blizzard had passed, but something deeper had begun. That evening, long after Daniel left, Emily was cleaning the surgical tray when she felt something under her shoe, a thin smear of blood she'd missed before. She wiped it and found a second metal fragment lodged between the tiles, almost identical to the one Daniel had taken, smaller but bearing the same code, K9 Taxi 12. She stared at it, unease rising. That wasn't a hunter's tag. It was serial, professional, military. "Who were you, girl?" she whispered, looking toward the sleeping dog. "And what did they do to you?" Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying a sound almost like a distant howl. Morning crept into Frost Hollow like a ghost, pale, hesitant, touching the snow without warmth. The blizzard had passed, but the world it left behind was hushed and strange, blanketed in white silence. The clinic windows were frosted over, sunlight scattering across instruments that still smelled faintly of blood and antiseptic. Daniel Hayes hadn't moved all night. He sat in the corner of the examination room, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the German shepherd sleeping beneath a wool blanket. Her breathing was slow but steady. Each exhale fogged the air like a small proof of survival. Emily Carter entered quietly, her boots squeaking against the linoleum. She wore a faded green cardigan over scrubs, hair tied back messily, exhaustion softening her usual calm precision. She poured 2 cups of coffee from the dented thermos on the counter and slid one toward him. "You didn't sleep," she said. He accepted the cup, nodding. "Neither did you." "I had a patient who refused to die." Daniel managed a faint smile. "You're good at what you do." "I try." She turned to check the IV drip. She lost a lot of blood. You carrying her here in that storm probably saved her. Daniel didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the dog's leg, bandaged thickly, the fur shaved, skin stitched neat and firm. Grace twitched in her sleep, paws flexing as if running through old memories. He took a sip of coffee. "I ever tell you about Rex?" Emily shook her head. "He was my partner in Bozeman. Best K9 I ever worked with. 2 years ago we got called into a raid. I went left, he went right." Daniel paused, jaw tightening. "There was a blast. I found him under a wall. Alive for maybe 2 minutes." Emily stopped adjusting the IV, watching his face. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but the motion looked heavy. "After that, I couldn't handle another dog. They reassigned me to patrol. Been on the road since." Silence fell again. The only sound was Grace's shallow breathing. Emily looked at him for a long moment, then spoke gently. "You stayed because you couldn't leave her, didn't you?" He gave a small laugh, tired but real. "Guess I've got a habit of trying to fix what's already broken." Days passed. The storm faded into memory, leaving behind mountains of snow that sparkled under pale sunlight. Grace's recovery was slow but remarkable. She ate little at first, then began to lift her head when Daniel entered. Her eyes followed his every movement, calm but wary, like someone waking from a long bad dream. Emily noted every change in a small leather notebook. Heart rate stabilizing, reflexes normalizing. She paused, watching Daniel scratch the back of the dog's ear. "She trusts you." "She trusts coffee," he said dryly, holding up a thermos lid she liked to sniff. Emily laughed softly, the sound rare and genuine. "You're easier to talk to when you're tired." He looked up. "Maybe you're easier to listen to when you're not trying to impress anyone." That earned him a smile. They fell into a rhythm, quiet mornings with snowdrifts piled against the windows, evenings filled with the low hum of heaters and the soft thump of Grace's tail. Daniel sometimes brought supplies from the station, canned food, blankets, even a small radio that only caught static and country music. In those quiet hours, Emily began to see the man beneath the uniform, disciplined but lonely, polite yet burdened by something he didn't name. His eyes, gray-blue like the frost on the glass, always seemed to be measuring distance, between people, between memories. One night, after checking Grace's vitals, Emily found him standing by the window. Outside, snow fell again, thin flakes swirling under the clinic's porch light. "She's healing faster than I expected," Emily said. "Some creatures fight harder than they should," he replied. She leaned beside him. "You mean her or you?" Daniel didn't smile this time. Maybe both. The heater clicked off. For a moment, only the wind filled the silence. "You ever think about leaving Frost Hollow?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but I came here to disappear. Seems like I did a good job of it." He turned slightly, studying her. "Running from something?" Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "Running toward quiet. After my husband died, the noise of the city felt wrong. Out here, even grief sounds softer." Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening again. "Guess we're both hiding in different uniforms." She met his eyes, something unspoken passing between them. Not attraction yet, but recognition. Two broken people orbiting the same fragile hope. That night, around midnight, Grace began to whimper. Daniel was the first to wake. He found her struggling to stand, claws scraping the tile. "Easy, girl." He knelt, steadying her body. Her breathing came fast, panicked. Emily rushed in moments later, hair unbound, eyes wide. "She's overheating," Emily said, feeling the dog's chest. "Her pulse is off. Help me roll her." They worked together again, Emily's hand steady, Daniel's strong and sure. She injected fluids, whispered reassurances, pressed gauze to her wound as Grace shuddered and then stilled. After a tense minute, her breathing leveled. Emily leaned back, heart pounding. "She's stabilizing." Daniel stayed on the floor, one hand still resting on the dog's side. "I thought we were losing her." "You didn't panic." He gave a faint, exhausted smile. "Didn't have time to." Emily sat beside him, the room quiet except for the hum of the old fridge. "You know," she said softly, "most people wouldn't have risked that storm. Why did you?" He stared at Grace, the glow of the lamp tracing the scar across his knuckles. "Because once someone saved me when I didn't deserve it. Maybe this was my turn." Emily nodded slowly. "Then maybe you and she have more in common than you think." Hours later, while Daniel dozed on the chair, Emily cleaned the instruments again. Grace slept peacefully, a faint tremor of life beneath her ribs. Emily leaned closer, checking the bandages one last time, and then she froze. There, under the newer stitches, was an older scar. Thin, deliberate, clean. Not the kind caused by accident or trap. It was surgical, done long ago with precision. She frowned, touching it gently. "This isn't from tonight," she whispered. Pulling a magnifier from her drawer, she examined the pattern. Whoever did it had used fine medical sutures, the kind reserved for specialized operations. Not farm vets, not hunters. And the placement. Low on the abdomen. Experimental, maybe. Her stomach turned. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Old incision, healed. Possibly from prior surgery. Nature unknown, purpose unclear. For a moment she just stood there, watching the dog breathe. Grace looked peaceful, but something about that scar gnawed at Emily's mind. She straightened, walked to the back room, and opened her laptop. Searching the serial number Daniel had shown her earlier, K9 Tax 12, led nowhere. The screen blinked. No data found. Of course, she murmured. Whoever owned you didn't want to be found. She glanced toward the examination room again. Daniel was still asleep in the chair, head tilted, light catching the streaks of silver in his hair. Grace lay curled near his boots, as if guarding him in return. Emily whispered to herself, "Two survivors found each other in a storm, but why do I feel like someone else sent her here?" Outside, the snow started again, silent, endless, indifferent. The world outside the Frost Hollow Clinic had turned to glass. The blizzard was gone, leaving behind a silence so sharp it seemed to hum. Snowbanks gleamed under a weak sun, and the trees stood heavy with frost, unmoving, frozen mid-breath. 2 weeks had passed since the night Daniel Hayes found the German Shepherd on Route 12. In that time, the town had fallen into its slow winter rhythm again. Plows scraping early mornings, chimneys coughing gray smoke, the diner's windows fogged with talk and coffee steam. But Daniel's thoughts stayed tethered to the dog who shouldn't have survived. Grace was healing faster than anyone expected. She could stand now, hobbling clumsily from her blanket to the door of the recovery room. Emily Carter had begun letting her outside for short walks, her bandaged leg barely touching the ground. Daniel visited every morning before shift, dropping by with coffee for Emily and jerky for Grace. "Officer Hayes, you're spoiling her," Emily teased one morning as he crouched to scratch the dog's ears. "She's earned it," he said. "We all have." Emily smiled, brushing snow from her coat. "If she keeps improving, she'll be walking normally within a week." Daniel nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. That metal fragment he'd found near the clinic door, K9 Tac 12, still sat heavy in his coat pocket. He'd checked local records, military databases, even old sheriff logs. Nothing. It was as if the code belonged to something that officially didn't exist. That thought kept him awake more nights than he admitted. On the morning of the 14th day, Daniel returned to the spot on Route 12 where he'd found Grace. The road was open again, though ice still glazed the edges. He parked his cruiser at the same curve and stepped out, the wind biting clean through his gloves. For a while, all he saw was snow, endless, unbroken white. Then his eyes caught something. Faint parallel lines running across the shoulder, half buried by new snowfall. Tire marks, wide, industrial. He knelt, brushing away the powder. "Not a pickup," he muttered. "Too deep, too wide." Following the faint trail down the embankment, he spotted something glinting beneath a patch of ice. He chipped at it with his pocket knife until the metal piece came free. It was a thin plate, corroded at the edges, with letters stamped into it. K9 Tactical Supply. Billings. MT. Daniel's breath clouded the air. Billings. That name carried weight. A city 3 hours east, home to the kind of companies that sold training equipment with unspoken purposes. He turned the plate over. On the back, faint scratch marks, like it had been ripped off in haste. He took a few photographs, bagged the plate Darbrehad, and drove straight to the station. The Frost Hollow Sheriff's Office was a squat brick building with more history than heat. The scent of old coffee and pine cleaner filled the air. Behind a desk sat Sheriff Ray. Donovan, a man who looked carved from the same granite as the mountains. In his early 60s, gray hair combed back, a permanent squint from decades of staring at trouble. When Daniel walked in, Donovan lifted his head from a stack of reports. "You look like hell, Hayes." "Good morning to you, too." "What brings you in on your day off?" Daniel dropped the evidence bag onto the desk. "Found this where I picked up the dog." Donovan slipped on his reading glasses, examining the tag. K9 Tactical Supply. His brows drew together. I know that name. You should. Didn't the Bureau investigate them? Yeah, Donovan said, leaning back. 2 years ago. Illegal sale of retired service dogs. Trained canines supposedly put down but shipped off to private buyers instead. Black market security firms, mercenary groups, you name it. Whole thing went dark after the indictments. Any survivors? None that made it back. Daniel looked at the tag. Until now. The sheriff sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You think your dog came from them? She's got a microchip scar on her neck, clean surgical line on her abdomen, and she panics at sirens. You tell me. Donovan set the tag down carefully. Hayes, listen. If you start poking around that name again, you'll draw heat. These people aren't hunters or smugglers, they're professionals. Daniel's jaw tightened. Grace didn't get left out there by accident. Somebody wanted her gone. I just want to know why. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're a stubborn bastard. Fine, I'll reach out to a contact in Billings. See if anything's still moving under that name. But keep this quiet. You got me? Yeah, Daniel said. Good. And Hayes, Donovan added as he turned to leave, don't let this thing eat you alive. You already lost one dog to the job. Daniel paused at the door. Maybe this time I'm not losing one. Maybe I'm saving one. That evening, the snow returned, not a storm, just a thin drift whispering across the streetlights. Frost Hollow looked almost peaceful again, smoke curling from chimneys, the sound of laughter leaking from the diner windows. Daniel parked his cruiser outside the clinic. The lights inside glowed warm against the gray night. He hesitated at the door, brushing snow from his hat before stepping in. Grace was awake, lying on a blanket near the heater, her eyes alert. She wagged her tail once when she saw him. Emily looked up from her desk, surprised. You're early. Shift's over? Just ended, he said, setting a paper bag on the counter. Dinner. Real food this time. Chicken soup from Sarah's diner. Her smile was tired, but genuine. You're going to make the rest of us look bad, Officer Hayes. I'll take my chances. They ate quietly in the small kitchen at the back, spoons, clinking against porcelain. The world outside felt far away. Emily finally asked, You found something, didn't you? Daniel froze mid-bite. What makes you say that? You have that look, she said, eyes narrowing with quiet amusement, the one people get before they do something reckless. He sighed, setting the spoon down. There's a company out of Billings, K9 Tactical Supply. Sheriff says they were dirty, selling trained dogs after retirement. I found a tag from them out by Route 12. Emily's expression darkened. So Grace might have been one of theirs. Maybe worse. She leaned back, rubbing her forehead. If that's true, someone out there might want her back. Daniel nodded. That's what worries me. For a long moment they sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the gap between thoughts. Finally, Emily said softly, You can't save every dog, Daniel. He looked toward the exam room, where Grace was sleeping peacefully. Maybe not, but I can try to save this one. Emily studied him. The quiet resolve, the weariness that never quite left his face. You're going to get yourself hurt. He smiled faintly. Wouldn't be the first time. Later that night, after she closed up, Emily found a note on her desk in Daniel's handwriting. Thanks for the coffee and the company. Something tells me this isn't over. D. Tucked beside it was a bag of ground coffee beans, a small gesture, simple and human. She smiled, shaking her head, then turned off the lights one by one. Outside, the snow had stopped. The town slept under a thin moon. She locked the door, pulling her coat tighter around her, and walked toward her truck. Across the street, parked half in shadow, sat a black pickup with no license plates. Its engine was off, windows dark. Emily didn't notice. She started her truck and drove away, taillights glowing red through the mist. Inside the black vehicle, a camera lens clicked. On its screen appeared an image of Daniel leaving the clinic earlier that evening, Grace's head visible in the window behind him. A man's gloved hand zoomed in, focusing on the officer's badge number. Then he smiled faintly and whispered into a phone, "Found her." The engine rumbled to life, and the truck rolled silently down the empty street, taillights vanishing into the snow. 6 weeks passed since the night Daniel Hayes found the dog bleeding in the snow. Winter had settled deeper into Frost Hollow, a quiet, relentless presence. The days were short, the nights endless. Frost grew thick on the clinic windows like white lace, and even the river behind the diner froze solid, humming faintly beneath the ice. Inside the veterinary clinic, however, life stirred. Grace's belly had grown round and taut, her gait slower but steady. Each movement spoke of strength returning, of something unbroken within her. Daniel came by nearly every evening after his patrol shift, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in his old flannel jacket, smelling faintly of snow and coffee. Emily Carter had gotten used to hearing the doorbell ring at odd hours. "You realize," she told him one evening as she sterilized instruments, "most men don't visit pregnant patients this often." Daniel smiled faintly. Most men didn't pull this one out of a blizzard. Grace wagged her tail at his voice, then returned to nudging the edge of her blanket into place. She had developed a strange habit of arranging it precisely before lying down, as if guarding something sacred. "She's nesting," Emily observed. "It won't be long now." Daniel crouched beside the dog, his hand gentle on her head. "You hear that, Grace? You've got work to do." The dog blinked at him, unamused. Emily laughed softly, shaking her head. "I think she's heard enough orders for a lifetime." The night Grace went into labor, the wind returned. Not the violent kind that clawed at the windows, but a low, steady moan that wrapped the town in sound. Snow fell in slow spirals beneath the streetlights. Inside the clinic, the only light came from a single lamp above the examination table. Emily worked calmly, sleeves rolled up, hair tied high. Her voice was low but firm. "Daniel, keep her steady. She's strong, but she's scared." Daniel knelt beside Grace, his palm pressed against her side. "You've been through worse, girl," he whispered. "You've survived worse." Grace whimpered, then pushed, body trembling. Time stretched thin. The storm outside rose and fell, wind rattling the clinic's old window panes. Sweat formed along Emily's brow despite the cold. "One more," she said softly. "Just one more." Then came the sound, small, fragile, miraculous. A whimper, then another. Then 3 tiny cries, slicing through the silence like sunlight through clouds. Emily exhaled deeply. "We've got 3, she said, relief coloring her voice. 1 male, 2 female. Daniel sat back, stunned. Grace licked her newborns, pulling them close. Tiny bodies, still slick and trembling, pressed against her for warmth. "Scout," Daniel said after a moment, nodding to the male. "And the girls?" "Luna," Emily answered, smiling. "And Bino, Ash." "Scout, Luna, and Ash," Daniel repeated softly. "Welcome to the world." The 2 humans sat side by side on the cold tile floor, watching Grace clean and nuzzle her pups. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white peace. For a long while, no one spoke. When dawn came, it was gentle and golden, the kind of morning that felt like forgiveness. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion painting his face. Emily handed him a mug of coffee, her fingers brushing his briefly. A spark. Quiet, but real. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said. "I didn't," he admitted. "Didn't want to miss this." She smiled. "You sound like a proud father." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Just someone who needed to see proof that some things can still end right. Emily studied him quietly, noticing the faint scar that crossed his jaw, the tiredness that never left his eyes. "You ever think you might be allowed peace, Daniel?" He stared out the window. "Maybe, when I stop looking over my shoulder." Something in his tone made her pause. "You found something else, didn't you?" Daniel hesitated. Donovan called. The Bureau reopened a small file on canine tactical supply. Said their assets didn't just vanish. They were transferred. Private contracts, off the record. Emily frowned. "So it's not over." "Not by a long shot." Grace stirred, nuzzling her pups. Daniel's expression softened again. "But for now, they're safe. That's what matters." He stayed until morning, helping Emily clean up. The clinic smelled of disinfectant, coffee, and life, the strangest combination of hope and exhaustion. The clock read 7:43 when he finally stepped out into the sunlight. The town was quiet. Snow glistened across rooftops, the air biting clean. Daniel yawned, stretching the stiffness from his back. As he approached his cruiser, something caught his eye, a piece of paper tucked beneath the wiper. He frowned, pulling it free. It was a photograph. His pulse slowed. The picture showed him and Grace outside the clinic, taken from a distance, maybe across the street. His face was half-turned, mid-smile. Grace was sitting beside him, head tilted, the early dawn behind them. Scrawled across the bottom in uneven black ink were 5 words: "Return what isn't yours." Daniel's stomach tightened. He scanned the empty street. Nothing. No movement, no engine hum, no footprints beyond his own. But he knew someone had been there, watching. He slipped the photo into his coat pocket and glanced back at the clinic door. Through the frosted glass he could see Emily holding one of the pups, smiling softly. He didn't tell her. Not yet. Later that evening, Emily found him sitting outside the clinic again, a thermos steaming beside him. Grace and the pups were asleep inside, tiny bodies pressed together for warmth. The street lamps cast halos in the snow. "You're here again," she said, stepping beside him. "Guess I like the quiet," he answered, though his hand never left his pocket. The one holding the photo. She studied his face. "You're not telling me something." He hesitated, then looked at her. "I got a message this morning. Someone's watching. They know about Grace." Emily froze. "Who?" "No name. Just a threat." He exhaled, the air white in front of him. "But whoever they are, they're close." For a while, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the pines beyond the town, carrying the faint cry of a snow owl. Emily's voice was calm when she finally said, "Then we protect her, all of them." Daniel looked at her, really looked. The fire in her eyes reminded him of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Belief. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We do." That night, after locking up, Emily lingered by the examination room. Grace lay curled around her pups, their soft breaths a rhythm of peace. Emily sat beside them, whispering, "You brought something back to him, you know, maybe to both of us." She glanced at the clock, nearly midnight, and rose to leave. But as she turned off the lamp, she noticed a small smear of snow near the window frame. She frowned, touched it, and felt the faint chill of air leaking through a crack. And something else. A boot print. Small, sharp, fresh. Her heart tightened. She closed the blinds slowly, locked the window latch, and turned off the lights. Outside in the street, snow fell soundlessly. A figure in a dark coat stood across from the clinic, watching through binoculars. When the lights went out, he smiled faintly and lowered them. "Good work, girl," he murmured, though there was no one beside him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a dog tag that gleamed faintly under the street lamp, K9-9A. Then he whispered into his phone, voice low and measured. Target confirmed alive, breeding successful, proceeding with next step. The call clicked off. The man turned and walked toward the waiting truck. Its headlights never turned on. Only the red glow of a cigarette marked his leaving, a brief ember swallowed by the snow. By late February, Frost Hollow had grown quieter. The storms were rarer now, the snow softer, melting at the edges of the pines. From the window of the small cabin behind the clinic, Daniel Hayes watched sunlight scatter across the drifts like powdered glass. The world looked at peace, but peace, he had learned, was a fragile thing. Inside, life had taken on a rhythm, gentle, steady. Grace limped less with every passing week, her fur thick and gleaming again. Her 3 pups had transformed from blind, helpless creatures into small explosions of energy. Scout, the boldest, already chasing his tail, Luna, curious and watchful, and Ash, the quiet one, who always stayed close to his mother. Emily had moved most of her work to the cabin to monitor them. It wasn't part of any official plan. She and Daniel had simply fallen into the habit of being near each other. The clinic had become too public, too easy to watch. The cabin, tucked behind a line of pines, offered secrecy and something else neither dared to name, belonging. "You ever get tired of being on alert?" she asked one morning while cleaning the pup's pen. "Can't say I remember what not being on alert feels like," Daniel replied. He was fixing the back fence, his sleeves rolled up, scars on his forearm catching the light. He had that look again, part soldier, part man, trying to live like one never existed. Emily smiled faintly. "You should let yourself breathe, Hayes." "I'll breathe when I stop seeing shadows in daylight." She sighed but didn't argue. She'd learned that with Daniel, silence worked better than persuasion. That afternoon, Daniel took Grace out for her first walk beyond the cabin in months. The snow was melting into slush, and the pines whispered softly overhead. He walked slowly, one hand resting on the leash, though he knew she didn't really need it. Her pace was confident now, her head held high, as if reclaiming something she'd once lost. "You remember this road?" he asked her quietly. "You almost didn't make it down this way." Grace tilted her head as though listening. Her breath puffed out in tiny clouds. For a moment, Daniel could almost believe she understood. Then she froze. Her ears pricked, nose twitching. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Daniel followed her gaze. Nothing but trees, snow, and the faint hiss of wind. Yet something in the stillness felt wrong, too deliberate. He reached instinctively for the holster at his belt, though he hadn't carried his weapon off duty in weeks. "Easy," he murmured, eyes scanning the tree line. "Let's head back." When they reached the cabin, Grace was restless. She kept pacing, barking low at the door, tail stiff. Emily looked up from her notes. "What's wrong with her?" "Could be scenting something," Daniel said. "Deer, maybe." But even he didn't sound convinced. That night he double-checked every lock before turning off the lights. At dawn he found the tracks. They started behind the woodshed, faint impressions of boots pressed deep into thawing snow. Too wide for Emily, too deliberate for a hiker. Daniel crouched, tracing the edges with his gloved hand. Whoever had been there had stood for a while, maybe watching the windows. Then the prince veered off toward the pines and disappeared. "Emily," he called, She came running out in her coat, hair still damp from a morning shower. "What is it?" He pointed. "Someone was here." She frowned. "Couldn't be kids?" "Not unless Frost Hollow's raising 12-year-olds in size 10 boots." Emily's face paled. "What do we do?" He scanned the fence line, the same cold tension creeping up his spine, the same instinct that had once saved his life in alleys and battlefields. "We stay alert. I'll call Donovan." But the sheriff's line was down that morning. Storm damage, the operator said. Daniel left a message anyway. When he hung up, he noticed something half buried near the side of the fence, a corner of metal, barely visible through the snow. He brushed it free. A small cage, square, made of reinforced steel bars, rusted but intact. Too small for an adult dog, too heavy to be dropped by accident. There was dried mud on the hinges. Recent. Emily's voice was tight behind him. "What is that doing here?" Daniel's mind ran fast. Someone brought it. Maybe to take one of them. The pups? Or Grace? He dragged the cage closer, examining it. Stamped faintly on one bar, K9 TACI 12, the same code he'd found weeks earlier. He exhaled slowly. They're not done with her. By evening, the cabin felt smaller, every creak a threat. Emily tried to keep working, scribbling notes about the puppy's health, but her hands trembled when she reached for her pen. "Maybe we should move them," she said finally. "To the station, somewhere safer." Daniel shook his head. "No, the station's the first place anyone would look. Out here, at least we can see them coming." Grace lay beside the pups, ears twitching at every sound. Scout whimpered once, and she soothed him with a nudge of her nose. "Besides," Daniel added, "if they're watching, moving them will only tip them off." Emily stared at him. "You sound like you've done this before." "I have," he said simply. The truth was, he hadn't stopped operating like a soldier since the day Rex died. The same vigilance, the same instinct to protect what little was left. Maybe he didn't know how to stop. That night the moon rose full and pale. Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle resting across his knees, listening. Beyond the pines, an owl hooted once, then fell silent. Grace stirred suddenly. Her ears pricked, and she began to whine, pacing toward the door. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The air was brittle cold. The beam cut. Across the yard, nothing but frost and long shadows. Then it caught something, a glint on Grace's collar. He crouched. "Hold still, girl." Beneath the fur near her neck, his fingers brushed against something smooth and metallic, a small ridge under the skin. A microchip. That in itself wasn't unusual, but the placement felt deeper than standard. He fetched Emily. "You've got the scanner." She blinked sleepily, then nodded and brought the handheld device from her medical bag. Daniel held Grace steady as Emily passed it across the collar. The reader beeped. The small screen lit up with green letters. Property of Federal K-9 Division, Unit 9A. Status lost since 2019. Emily's eyes widened. Federal K-9 Division? That's government issue. Daniel stared at the screen. Unit 9A. She was part of a special unit, missing for 4 years. Emily swallowed hard. How does a government K-9 end up half dead on Route 12? Somebody wanted her erased, Daniel said quietly. And maybe her pups were the reason she was kept alive. The words hung between them, heavy as the silence outside. Emily whispered, "You think they'll come back?" "I know they will." Before dawn, Daniel recorded the chip's number in his notebook, locking the data away in a secure drive. He also called Donovan again. This time the line held. When the sheriff heard, his voice dropped low. "Hayes, that's above both our pay grades. You keep her hidden. If she's a missing federal asset, Someone's going to want her back, and not for the reasons you'd hope." "What do you mean?" "I mean there's a difference between recovery and cleanup. Watch your six, son." Daniel hung up, jaw tight. Outside, the sky was turning blue-gray, the color of secrets. He turned to Emily, who was watching him from the doorway, one arm wrapped around herself. "We'll get through this," he said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You promise?" He looked at Grace lying with her pups, the faint scar on her neck catching the light. "I don't make promises I can't keep," he said, "but I'll fight to make this one real." When he finally sat down, the first rays of morning touched the tops of the pines, painting them gold. Frost Hollow seemed peaceful again, but Daniel knew better. The silence beneath those trees wasn't peace. It was waiting. And somewhere beyond the woods, someone else was waiting too. The wind changed that morning. It blew from the east, sharp, metallic, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and thawing pine. Daniel Hayes stood by the cabin window, one hand wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, the other resting on the revolver at his hip. For weeks he had been waiting for the quiet to break. It finally did. Sheriff Donovan called near noon. His voice crackled over the line, heavy with unease. "Hayes, you need to hear this. I got a call from an old bureau contact in Billings. That company, K9 Tactical Supply. They never shut down. They rebranded, moved operations north." Daniel straightened. "Where north?" "Old freight depot outside town, off Route 17, been listed as condemned for years." Daniel looked out toward the tree line, where Grace was playing with her pups in the pale sunlight. "You think she came from there?" Donovan exhaled. "Let's just say your girl might be the last piece of evidence someone forgot to burn. I'll check it out." "Hayes, don't go alone." But the line clicked dead before the warning finished. By dusk, Daniel's cruiser rolled to a stop outside the abandoned depot. The building loomed against the sky, a scar of rusted tin and broken glass. The old sign still clung to the chain-link gate, "Caution, private property." Snow had drifted against the doors, and the air reeked faintly of oil. He parked 100 yards back, headlights off. The only sound was the crunch of his boots and the distant cry of crows. Inside the main hangar he found cages, dozens of them, empty, stacked 2 by 2, still stained with fur and dried blood. The air was thick with the stench of ammonia and iron. A makeshift office stood at the back, plywood walls, flickering light. Daniel's flashlight beam swept across the desk. Crates labeled microchips, Lot 09A, were stacked in rows. One lay open, filled with small vials and data drives. He picked one up, reading the etched code, Federal K9 Division, 9A reassignment. The same unit on Grace's chip. His chest tightened. "What the hell were they doing here?" he whispered. He didn't hear the man approach. A sharp crack struck the back of his skull. The world lurched sideways. The flashlight clattered to the ground, beams spinning wildly across the floor before fading to black. When Daniel woke, his hands were bound behind him, head pounding. The room stank of diesel and sweat. A single lantern burned near the doorway, throwing long shadows against the walls. A voice spoke from the dark. "You shouldn't have come here, officer." The man stepped into the light, tall, built like stone, face hidden beneath a black cap and stubble. His eyes were cold gray, the kind that had seen violence and stopped caring. "You must be the cop who found her," the man said. "The miracle dog." Daniel said nothing. "Grace, right?" The stranger smiled thinly. "You think you rescued her. You didn't. You stole company property." "What company?" Daniel growled. The man laughed softly. "You really think K9 Tactical Supply was a business? It was a cover. Project 9A, behavioral engineering for combat K9s. She was the prototype that survived. We lost her during transport in 2019. Guess she found her way to your pretty little town. Daniel strained against the ropes. You turned service dogs into lab equipment. They were assets, and assets don't retire. The man pulled a pistol from his belt and leveled it casually. You'll tell me where she is, then maybe I'll make it quick. Daniel's jaw clenched. You won't touch her. The man's grin widened. You'll be surprised what I can do when people don't cooperate. He raised the gun, and the door exploded inward. Grace hit first, a blur of muscle and fury, teeth flashing in the dim light. The man fired once, missing wide. Daniel rolled to the side as Grace lunged again, clamping onto the attacker's arm. The lantern toppled, oil spilled, igniting in an instant. Flames crawled up the walls, devouring wood and air alike. Daniel kicked free of the ropes and lunged for the fallen pistol. Grace snarled, holding the man down until Daniel struck him across the head with the gun's butt. The man went limp. "Grace!" Daniel shouted, coughing through the smoke. "Come on, girl, we have to move." She barked once, blood streaking her muzzle, then limped toward the exit. Outside, the fire spread fast, orange light tearing through the night sky. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Donovan's backup, maybe, or the fire crew. Daniel stumbled into the snow, Grace beside him, panting, one paw bleeding again. Behind them, the depot burned like a pyre. By the time the sheriff's convoy arrived, the place was nearly gone. Flames roared through the roof, black smoke twisting into the stars. Donovan stepped from his truck, face pale in the orange light. "Jesus, Hayes, what the hell happened?" Daniel handed him the pistol, hands trembling. "You were right. It wasn't a company. It was an operation. Government-linked, off the books. They were modifying canines for intelligence work, genetic tracking. Maybe worse. Grace was the last one." Donovan stared at him. "And the others?" "Dead or sold." The sheriff cursed under his breath. "You're lucky you're not one of them." Daniel looked toward the burning building. "I'm not sure I'm not." Back at the clinic, Emily waited with the pups. When Daniel carried Grace through the door, the smell of smoke still clung to his coat. Emily's eyes widened. "What happened?" "She saved my life," he said simply, lowering Grace onto the exam table. Again. Emily worked in silence, cleaning the wound on Grace's leg. It was a shallow bullet graze, nothing fatal. But the dog shook from exhaustion, head resting in Daniel's lap. When Emily finally spoke, her voice was tight. "You found them, didn't you?" He nodded. "Found the men behind it. Found what they did to her." She swallowed. "And?" "I stopped them," he said quietly. "Or maybe the fire did." Emily looked at him, searching his face. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough that I wish I hadn't seen it." She finished bandaging Grace's leg, then stepped back. "You realize whoever ran that program won't let this go. Burning their files doesn't erase the truth." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know." He reached into his pocket and handed her a flash drive. Small, scorched, but intact. "Found this before the fight. It's a list of every dog they experimented on. Every serial number. Grace's was last on the file." Emily turned it over in her hand, reading the faded label. Project 9A, Final Replication Data. "Replication?" she whispered. "You think they were breeding her?" Daniel met her eyes. "They were planning to. And now they know she has pups." Outside, the sirens faded. The fire was dying out somewhere beyond the hills. Inside the clinic, only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. Grace slept between them, her body rising and falling steadily, surrounded by her 3 pups. Emily spoke first. "We can't stay here. If they're coming for her—" "I know," Daniel interrupted, "but we can't run forever either. Frost Hollow's all she knows, and it's all I've got left." Emily looked at him, her expression softening. "Then we fight smart." He smiled faintly. "You sure you signed up for this?" "I didn't," she said, "but I'm staying anyway." For a long moment they just stood there, the weight of the night pressing around them. Then Daniel reached out, resting a hand on Grace's head. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "You brought the fire this time, not me." Grace's tail thumped weakly in reply. Outside, the horizon glowed faintly red. The depot's smoke rose into the cold night air, a signal, or perhaps a warning. Somewhere beyond that dark line of trees, someone would see it and know their secret hadn't burned quietly. Winter left Frost Hollow the way an old soldier leaves the battlefield, slow, aching, unwilling. The last snow melted in the ditches by March, revealing the bones of the earth beneath. Broken twigs, forgotten tire tracks, and new grass pushing through frostbitten soil. For the first time in months, Daniel Hayes woke without the echo of gunfire in his dreams. Outside his cabin, the forest breathed again. Birds returned, streams cracked open, whispering under sunlight. Life impossibly went on. Grace lay on the porch with her pups, Scout, Luna, and Ash, watching the world awaken. Her leg had healed, the scar now only a faint pale line under her fur. Daniel sat beside her, mug in hand, eyes softer than they had been in years. "You did it, girl," he murmured. "You brought them here safe." Grace lifted her head, tail brushing the wooden boards. The pups tumbled over each other in clumsy play, biting ears, chasing shadows, unaware of what their mother had endured. Emily Carter stepped out with 2 cups of steaming tea. Her hair was tied back, her coat unzipped. There was color in her cheeks again. "You look almost peaceful," she said. "Almost," Daniel answered with a faint grin. They sat quietly for a while, watching sunlight move through the pines. 3 weeks had passed since the fire at the depot. The authorities had closed the case officially as industrial sabotage, though Daniel and Donovan knew better. The flash drive Daniel recovered was now locked in the sheriff's safe, its data encrypted and under federal review. "Think the truth will ever come out?" Emily asked one afternoon while cleaning instruments at the clinic. Daniel paused from patching the old kennel door. "Truth always does. The question's who'll still be around to tell it." Emily met his eyes. "You don't plan on leaving, do you?" He hesitated. "I've thought about it. Some nights it feels like trouble just follows me." "Maybe," she said softly. "But maybe this town's the place trouble was meant to stop." He didn't answer. But later that night, when he checked the locks again and found himself smiling at the sound of Grace snoring beside the stove, he realized she might be right. One morning, Donovan arrived in his old Ford, gravel crunching under the tires. He stepped out holding a manila folder. "Got something for you," he said, handing it over. Inside were 3 official documents, DNA reports from the remains recovered at the depot site. "They match 4 dogs from Project 9A, Donovan said. "All female, all terminated between 2018 and 2019. Grace was the 5th. Daniel's hand tightened around the papers. "The only survivor." Donovan nodded grimly. Her, and whatever she carries in her blood. Those pups. They might be the last clean line. Daniel looked out the window where Luna was dragging half a blanket across the porch, tail wagging furiously. "Then they'll stay that way," he said. "Hayes," Donovan warned. "If the Bureau comes knocking, you can't just hide them." "I'm not hiding them," Daniel said evenly. "I'm protecting them. There's a difference." Donovan studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You've earned the right to choose, I suppose. Just don't wait too long to ask for help when it gets ugly again. You're not alone this time." When the sheriff left, Daniel stood at the window long after the truck disappeared. the folder heavy in his hand. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he was running from his past or toward something worth staying for. That evening, the sky turned gold, the kind of light that makes even old scars look holy. Emily cooked dinner in the small kitchen: potato stew, bread, and black tea. Grace sat under the table, her head resting on Daniel's boot. "You know," Emily said between bites, "for someone who claims he hates small towns, you've rebuilt half of one." Daniel chuckled. "You think so? You fixed the school fence, helped the post office roof, and rebuilt my clinic's back room after the storm. That's half a town, at least." He smiled quietly, then glanced at her. "You ever think about not being alone in this?" Emily paused, spoon midair. "Are you asking me to stay, Hayes?" "I'm asking," he said slowly, "if you'd mind if I did." Her laugh was soft, warm. "You're terrible at this." "I'm out of practice." They both laughed then, a sound so small yet so enormous in that quiet room. Outside, the pups barked at their own reflections in the window, tails wagging. Grace watched them, eyes calm, proud. 2 nights later, Daniel sat by the fire, the flash drive on the table before him. The label, Project 9A, Final Replication Data, glimmered faintly in the firelight. He turned it over in his hand, considering. He could destroy it. End it all right there. But if he did, the truth of what had been done, to Grace, to dozens like her, would vanish forever. He remembered what Donovan said: "Truth always comes out." With a sigh, he slipped the drive into a small tin box, sealed it, and placed it beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth. "If anyone ever needs to know," he murmured, "they'll find it here." Grace lifted her head at his voice, amber eyes gleaming in the glow. "Don't worry," he told her softly. "No one's taking you anywhere again." The next morning brought warmth, real warmth. Frost Hollow looked different under sunlight. The snow had retreated into shadows, and the air smelled of pine and wet soil. Emily and Daniel took the pups for their first walk into town. The locals stopped to stare. 3 wobbly balls of fur darting between their boots, Grace trotting proudly ahead. "Looks like you've started a parade," Emily teased. Daniel smiled. "Let them look. Maybe. It'll remind people there's still good left." At the market, an elderly woman handed Luna a biscuit. "Such beautiful dogs," she said. "Are they yours?" Daniel hesitated only a moment. "Ours," he said finally, glancing at Emily. Her answering smile was small, but radiant. As the day faded, the two returned to the cabin. The air shimmered gold, birdsong floating above the thawing fields. Daniel stood by the fence, watching the forest turn to shadow. "Hard to believe winter's over," Emily said behind him. "Winter's never really over," he replied. "It just sleeps a while." She touched his arm. "Then let's keep the fire burning till it wakes again." He looked down at her hand, at the quiet strength in her eyes, and nodded. "Deal." Grace barked softly, tail swishing, as if sealing their promise. That night, under the soft hum of the forest, Daniel wrote his first journal entry in years, an old soldier's habit revived. March 21st. The snow's gone. Grace healed. The pups are wild. The world feels almost kind again. Maybe redemption isn't something we find. Maybe it's something that finds us. He closed the book, set it on the shelf, and sat by the fire with Grace at his feet. Outside, the wind stirred the pines. Gentle now, not haunting, the kind of wind that carries seeds instead of ghosts. And somewhere, deep in the woods, a single wolf howled, not a cry of warning, but of belonging. Grace lifted her head, ears twitching, and for the first time since that terrible night, she didn't flinch. She simply listened. Far away in a government office in Washington, a new file blinked open on a secure monitor. Project Shadow Unit. Reactivation Order. TIR. Target Subject 9A. Location unknown. The cursor blinked once, then twice. Someone began to type. In the quiet town of Frost Hollow, one broken man, one wounded dog, and 3 tiny lives prove that miracles don't always arrive in shining light. Sometimes they crawl through the snow, tired, scarred, half forgotten, and still find their way home. Daniel thought he was rescuing Grace, but maybe it was God using Grace to rescue him. In every act of mercy, in every small kindness, there's a spark of something holy, a reminder that heaven still breathes through the cracks of this world. So if you've ever felt lost, if life has ever left you in the cold, remember this. God's grace doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just wags its tail and waits for you to open the door. If this story touched your heart, share it. Maybe it will find someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment about your own miracle, and let's pray together for all the lost and wounded souls still waiting for their Frost Hollow. May God bless you, your home, and every creature that still believes in love. Subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances, because sometimes the smallest act of compassion is the biggest miracle of all.